Hi, this is Erick Eidus from PupPod, and I'm here with Robin Bennett, and we're going to talk a little about her experience with using PupPod. But to begin with, could you just tell us a little bit about your background, Robin?
Sure. I have been a certified professional dog trainer for 20 some years now and have been a member of the Association of Professional Dog Trainers as well for that entire time too. I actually just am currently on the board of APDT. I was the chair for the past 2 years. I'm now currently serving as the immediate past chair. And I owned my own training facility for 18 years in Virginia. Recently, I've moved to Colorado Springs, Colorado, and now do a lot of consulting with dog daycare and boarding facilities to help them train their staff to keep dogs safe during off-leash play. So that's a little bit about me.
That's great. That's great. And you had a chance to use the PupPod and the Pet Tutor bundle together with your dog Ranger. Can you tell us a little bit about Ranger and the kind of the experience that you had with Ranger?
Sure. Ranger's a lab. He's a 1 year old, little over 1 year old now. So when I was using the PupPod, well, I'm still using it now with him, but when I started using it, he was probably 6 months. So obviously very high energy. We were living in a motorhome at the time, so a really high energy dog in a really tiny space. And the PupPod, and I would say the PupPod and the Pet Tutor bundle really kind of helped save my sanity. So if you want, I can talk a little bit about the different scenarios I used it in and the different things I found with it.
Yeah, that would be great.
Well, I would say starting out, I started just with the PupPod by itself. And that was great in terms of just teaching him how to interact with the PupPod. I have since actually recommended that specific product for families. And families where either the person doesn't necessarily care about the technical side of how to clicker train or how to use positive reinforcement. They just want to work with their dog and play with their dog and bond with their dog, because you really don't need to know anything. You need to know how to turn on the PupPod and need to know how to give treats to your dog. And beyond that, it tells you what to do. So it's great for people who don't want all the technicals. They don't want to know all the reason behind what you're doing. They just like the idea of being able to interact with their dog. And especially that's true with children. So if you just want your kids to have a way to interact with the dog, that the iPad or the iPhone or your Android or whatever is going to tell you when to treat, it's a great way to get your child working with your dog without having to do a lot of explaining. And I find kids, especially kids 8 and above, are really good with training dogs. And so this is just a really easy tool to get them working with their dog, get their hands off the dog, get them to only give one treat at a time instead of all the treats they want to give, and to give it at the right time. So that's a great game, I think, for kids to be able to play. So I used it a lot initially just to teach Ranger how to understand when to touch the PupPod by itself, and then I was just treating. Later on, I found the really huge beauty of it for me, for what my living situation was when I bundled it with the Pet Tutor. Because living in such a small environment with my dog, when I needed to work, he was constantly, within arm's distance pretty much of me. And that didn't always work. When I needed to take a shower, I needed to make dinner, I needed to do some work, I needed to just do something when I couldn't interact with my dog, but he wanted attention. The Pet Tutor and PupPod bundle was awesome because I could set that up and make it varying degrees of difficulty, and it just worked all on its own. So I didn't really have to be there. I was physically in the room since I was in a motorhome, but I didn't have to actually be doing any of the work. The PupPod and the Pet Tutor did it all. And I played around with that, with feeding him. I would sometimes feed him. I would sometimes just let him play in the evening for a few minutes. Usually 10 or 15 minutes is the length of time I was using it for, I would say, on average. And that was enough to tire him out. If I did, and then I also played with the distance. Sometimes I started out with obviously the two things were really close together, but I worked up to where he was going back and forth the whole length of the RV. So our RV is 38 feet. So he was going back and forth. And with that, doing that for 10 minutes, he would be exhausted afterwards. It was really a great way to give him some exercise without having to go outside and take him for a long walk or take him to the dog park or whatever. So I would say that combination is a great tool to use for so many situations. just obviously what I mentioned before, for what I used it for. If you're trying to make dinner, or you're trying to do some work, or you're trying to get on the treadmill and you want to work out, or you're trying to do, exercises in your house and you just need your dog to be doing something else, that's a great combination. The other way that I would look at using it, and this would be more with the training side of me, would be teaching the dog not to bark at things, teaching the dog to be relaxed in a crate, teaching the dog to be comfortable in a car. So all of those training tools, because you can use that combination to teach the dog they get a reward when a person walks by, or they get a reward when they're quiet in the crate. All of that training wise is an amazing use of the combo package as well.
Yeah, my dog, Ollie, has been playing for, since he was 4 months old. And over the holidays, we were staying in a place that had stairs. And I put the PupPod and the Pet Tutor at opposite ends of the staircase. And it really made a difference in how fast it wore him out to basically create a doggy stairmaster.
Oh, that's awesome.
As long as the stairs, aren't too narrow where the dog could hurt themselves, it seemed to work really well for just giving him more physical stimulation, more of the physical exercise.
Right. That makes sense, actually. That's I was surprised at the difference between just a couple of feet and then 30 feet. So even if you went even farther than that to 50 feet or whatever, or you add the stairs, or you could even add like a jump or something. So when they come back, they have to jump over something to get back to it or to get to it. I think all of those make a huge difference. And I think they're also add a little variety to the whole process for the dog.
Well, that's a great idea with having something for them to hop over. I'm going to try that. We did. I have noticed that when we spread it out, just even in our living room, that during the course of a normal meal, I put an activity tracker on Ollie, and he's walked about a mile just at each meal, just going back and forth between the dispenser over the course of an hour to between 1 to 2 hours. And so one of the things I was curious to hear your feedback on is, what did you notice, if anything, about how Ranger was learning through the process? Did you see any things that you were surprised about, or just you saw him make a connection, or he learned a concept as he was playing the game?
I definitely think he learned the concept as he was playing the game. And I think what surprised me the most was he never became obsessed about eating the food, if that makes sense. So he definitely understood that touching the PupPod at certain times would cause the treat to happen. But he became, I guess the best way to explain it is he almost became more thinking than just reacting. So sometimes with the food toys, because I use a lot of stuffed toys, obviously, with Ranger, just as a general rule of thumb. So I'll stuff, different toys and give it to him. And sometimes he becomes a little manic about how he plays with those. So if I stuff like a hollow bone, he'll get to the point where he'll just pick up the bone and whip it on the floor or throw it around. And I don't mind that. It's obviously how he's playing, but I don't get the sense, I'm sure to some extent he is thinking, but it's a little more of a high energy thinking, I guess, if you want to call it that. When he was working with the Pet Tutor and the PupPod, I felt like he was more really thinking about what exactly do I need to do? And it wasn't just constant behavior. He wasn't just constantly throwing behaviors. I felt like he was really thinking and going, oh yeah, it's this. And so it was sort of a calmness in the work that he was doing. But I think that, to me at least, that indicated more mental work, which I think really tired him out. So I think the combination of just moving back and forth to go from one object to the other, and then the mental thinking of what exactly do I need to do, causes him to just get exhausted. So, and it's a good type of exhaustion, I think. I think it's really that kind of exhaustion you get when you're just really, really, really trying to mentally challenge yourself. So I think that was probably my biggest surprise, because I was a little bit worried that he is a lab and he does like food. I was a little worried with the Pet Tutor that he would just go up to it and just knock the whole thing over. And because really, if he did that, he could get all the treats. And he never did. He was perfectly happy to get the treats that had fallen out and then go back to the PupPod and do some more games and interaction with that and come back. It was really interesting to me that he never tried to go, oh, there's a ton of treats in this thing, and I want more of those because I know they're in there. And the same thing with the PupPod. The PupPod, I do use Kong toys with him, so he's familiar with the shape of that, but he never ever treated it like a Kong toy. I mean, his Kong toy he'll pick up and throw around. Even if it's empty, he will sometimes do that because I think it smells like food, and he knows that's how you get the treats out of there. He never did that with the PupPod, so he never became obsessed with like, how do I get the food out of here? Because obviously there's no food in the PupPod. But I think those were probably my two biggest observations in terms of working with him. He just really was into the game and he was obviously getting the reward, but it wasn't what's the best way to get the food all at once. He was really trying to figure out how to play the game.
We get that question a lot about will the dog, especially a dog that is like a lab that can be, that can have, could get obsessed with a toy and have the jaw strength to tear it apart. We get questions a lot about, how strong is the toy? But I've also seen that same behavior difference where dogs kind of figure out that it's a tool to get the food as opposed to the object of the game is to destroy the toy. I don't see that. I almost never see that. So it's interesting that you had a similar experience.
Yeah. And I will say that Ranger is a dog that does like to chew up toys. So he will, if it's a toy that can be shredded, he will shred toys. I think for the PupPod, he learned it had nothing to do with him grabbing the toy and everything to do with touching it. And so he would sometimes touch it with his nose and sometimes touch it with his paw, but he never ever tried to rip it apart or take it apart. So which was really cool.
And what level is he up to?
He was kind of bouncing back and forth between 3 and 4. So he was at the 4, and then I would let him do that for a while, and then I would usually lower it to 3 just to give him a little bit more success again, because 4 was a little bit harder for him.
And how long do you think he would be? Because there's still more levels that he hasn't even reached. And so what I've found is that it takes months for dogs to get, this is the kind of product that people will use for months, if not years, that their dogs will still stay engaged with. Do you have thoughts on that?
I think it would be months for them to really master the higher levels, because it really does take some mental thinking on the dog's part to figure out, okay, it's not for the level that he was on at level 3. If he touched it, pretty much he was going to get a reward. But then you could even within level 3 make the time difference from when he heard the sound. So even just within each level, there's levels within the level, if that makes sense, because you can adjust how often the noise comes out. But then at the level 4, where it's really only when you hear one particular sound are you going to get a reward, then that becomes a little bit harder, because now they have to figure out it's not just touching it, it's touching it in association with the right sound at the right time. And so I think it is a game that you could use for months and months and still not have used up all of the games. I don't think it's going to be something your dog's going to learn that fast and then you're done with the game, because they're going to get, they get bored with it or whatever, just because you can make it so much more challenging. And that was for me, I think some of it also depends on how often you use it. So if you're using it, multiple times a day, you might speed things up. But I also feel like you have to keep going back to making it a little bit easier. So they might have one session where it's pretty challenging, and then you end that session maybe making things a little bit easier, and then make it so you're kind of ping pong back and forth between kind of easy and then a little bit challenging. So for that, I think that process is going to make the process slower overall as well. But I think that's better for the dog too.
Well, we get questions a lot about, will the game get harder automatically? And we've intentionally given the pet parent control over difficulty. So it's interesting to hear that you were using that. And so you were deciding the difficulty level on a particular day or occasion, or, kind of how your dog, how to keep it challenging for the dog, but you're, reading where they're at so that you can adjust it so it's the right difficulty level on any given day.
Yeah, and I think actually I was one of those people that was like, can't it just get harder on its own? Can't you just build that in? But the reality is, so it's just funny because I actually changed my tune on that, because I kind of thought that was a good idea initially. But the reality is, and I saw this with my own dog, with it, a lot of depends on what goal I actually wanted. So if I just needed 10 minutes of quiet time for myself, I didn't really care the difficulty. I just wanted him to be doing something for 10 minutes. I wanted to make it easy enough that he wouldn't give up and he wouldn't stop and look for me for assistance. So that would be one goal. But the other thing is, if I take that places, so with me, because I was living in the motorhome, we would sometimes go to a new place, or I'd take him to a trade show and now I'm in a hotel room. I don't necessarily want that to be as hard in a brand new location that I would in a home that he's been used to doing it with. Because dogs, you know, they have strong days and weaker days, just like we do. We have good days and bad days. If he's having a harder day because he's in a new environment, he's been at a trade show all day, he can't think. It's like us. Sometimes at the end of the day, I'm like, I can't think right now. I just need something really easy to do. So I might make it super, I might even go back to level 1 if I just need him to do 10 minutes in a hotel after a trade show where he's been, you know, brain dead all day. And then at another time where he's just woke up in the morning, he's full of energy, it's snowing out, I can't do anything with him, I want to really challenge him for that. So having the ability to decide that on my own based on what kind of day I'm having, what kind of day the dog's having, I think is really important.
And just so people who haven't seen the product yet understand, when we're talking about changing the time between sounds, that adds, it makes the dog concentrate for longer. And what did you find with that variable where you said like sometimes you would go to level 3 where the dog just has to touch the toy on the cue, but you can adjust with the time interval how much time there is between cue sounds. How did you adjust that, and where did you find Ranger to where did you find what did you find worked, you know, with that feature?
I think for him, as I did it more, he developed more patience, I think, or impulse control, if you want to call it that, which I think is an important skill, especially for certain dogs that would maybe don't have as much impulse control. I used it a little bit where I wanted him on the edge of this might be too hard and I might give up. Because if you challenge them too hard, too far, too fast, they might just walk away from the toy. So we obviously don't want that. So I wanted him right at that point of like, I think I can wait, I think I can wait, I think I can wait. And then boom, he gets success, he figures out, he touches it, he gets another treat. And that time I can start to increase as he gets better at knowing I'm still going to get the reward. I just have to have some patience. I usually adjusted it based on kind of his mental energy level, really. And most of the time I was watching kind of his behavior to see where was he. For Ranger in particular, what happens, and I know this from doing other puzzle toys with him, if he starts to get frustrated, he'll usually come to me. And it's his way of like, this happens a lot, like his ball gets stuck under the couch. He'll try to get it for a while, and then he's like, wow, I can't get it. He'll come to me. And that's usually his indicator of like, I've given up. Can you help me? So I wanted him at the point where he wasn't trying to come to me to say like, what else am I supposed to be doing here? But I think that's something every dog has that level. And as the human that lives with that dog, you probably know some of those signs that your dog's already doing. So for me, I based it on kind of what his energy level was at the day. Like I said, first thing in the morning, he's usually a little bit more into it all. And I think because he hasn't been thinking, because he's been sleeping all night, I can challenge him a little bit more in the morning than I can really late at night. And so it was just really monitoring that.
And, you know, with Ollie, my dog, he injured his shoulder, and we put the PupPod and Pet Tutor really close together so we had a low impact activity for him so he wouldn't keep re-injuring himself. And we've also, when we designed the product, we designed it so you can run it off of lights. I don't know if you had a chance to do that with Ranger, but we have clients or customers that have deaf dogs that will play off of the sounds, and some that have blind dogs that deaf dogs that can play off of the lights, and blind dogs that will play off of the sounds. Did you see other scenarios that you think your customers could benefit from, other ways to use this as a tool?
I think doing the sounds, I actually played with one session with that, doing the lights and the sounds alternating to see. And I do think for blind and deaf dogs, this is a tool that could be great fun for them, and just use whatever sensory obviously that they have, and it will still work the exact same way. The other things I've seen it, or I would recommend it for, some of the stuff I talked about earlier, dogs that we would use it outside in the RV when we were sitting outside in the RV, because there's a lot of activity that goes on in an RV park. Dogs walk by, people walk by. One of the RVs, there were rabbits that went by, really friendly rabbits. So we used it a lot for teaching him when those things happen that he's going to get a reward if he's quiet. So just attention, kind of keeping attention on us versus whatever else the distraction is. I think that's a great tool. If you have dogs that bark at, out the windows of your house or on the patio or whatever, I think the combination of those two tools can work really well to get them to understand that quiet equals a reward, or coming to you equals a reward, or whatever. But I think that's a great tool to use it for. I love the low impact of it. I think that's a great tool. I've seen it used actually with one of my clients in a crate. So their dog was barking in a crate, and they set the pet tutor up to reward for quiet, so that they were able to get the dog to stay quiet for longer periods of time in the crate. And I think that's a great tool. I also think for pet care facilities who have, since I work with a lot of them, will have dogs that sometimes are in the runs and they're nervous or anxious or barking or whatever, showing some kind of anxiety behavior. I think this is a great game that you can put the pet tutor on top of the run or hook it to the outside and the PupPod's inside. So as they're interacting with the PupPod, they get the treats from the pet tutor that fall into the lodging area. I think that's the other place that I would say is a really great way to use it as well.
Well, that's great to hear all your feedback on the product and how you used it and your recommendations. It's super valuable to hear your input. So thanks a lot for taking some time to chat with us and for all your feedback.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And before I let you go, next we're just about to release 2 new features that came from input from you. So in the next month, we'll be releasing the features that randomize the time interval and randomize the pattern of the sounds to add even more advanced levels to the game, so that people can just update the app, and that will update the toy, and they'll have these new features for difficulty that came from conversations we had with you a couple months ago.
That's great. Yeah, I'm excited to try that.
Fabulous. Well, have a great day, and we'll appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.